Warning, spoilers for Uncharted 1 to 3, but these games are 10 years old, so seriously, play them already. Up until 1 month before the release of Uncharted 4, I had never really touched an Uncharted game. I think I may have played the demo on PS Vita, but from what I had seen, I just thought the games weren't for me. My young mind had been corrupted by Halo and Call of Duty, and I honestly might never have experienced proper storytelling in a video game, because for some reason I made my judgments on games based on their shooting mechanics. Fortunately, after a lot of persistence from my best friend Josh, he forced upon me his copy of the Nathan Drake collection, and over the next month, I experienced Uncharted. From the few minutes that I had played before, I knew a bit of what to expect. Tons of firefights mixed with puzzle solving and platforming, but by comparison, the shooting was fairly primitive and didn't have the smooth polish of a first-person shooter. But soon after that, the minute-to-minute gameplay faded into the background as I became immersed in the stories. We get to see Nathan Drake and his rugged charms take over the innocent reporter Elena as they traverse action-packed set pieces, take down armies, and find treasures, along with some help from his best friend and replacement father figure, Sully. I played along as Drake discovered the secrets of El Dorado and the curse that came with it, then discovered Shambhala and the guardians that were protecting it. From what I remember, the first two games, aside from their setting, followed a pretty similar skeleton. Facing waves and waves of enemies, grinding towards a hidden treasure before encountering some kind of monster that would be more challenging for the late game. But this little bit of predictability didn't make them bad by any means. And the only real reason that I keep mentioning the monsters is because it's such a standout part of the first two games, and it really signifies that you're close to the end of the game, which is something the third game desperately needed. After finishing the first game, my only real complaint was the balance in each chapter. As you progressed further into the game, it failed to get significantly more challenging, but rather more time-consuming. Near the third quarter of the game, you would end up defeating exhausting quantities of enemies. This seemed to be a replacement for actually increasing the length of the story. It would take a long time to complete, but it lacked any depth. Soon after that feeling, endless hordes of cookie-cutter soldiers were replaced with zombie monsters that were much harder to kill and a somewhat refreshing challenge to end the game. As for the first game, I considered it the worst technically, but not my least favorite. It was probably a really good game for the time that it was made. The second game started off with a lot of improvements. The pattern was still there, but the diversity of enemies and environments were greatly increased. That definitely kept things more interesting. In addition, I found the story and the set pieces so much more engaging. The first time I climbed up the exploding train carcass is forever burned in as one of my favorite gaming memories. Also, I'm pretty sure I just prefer a snowy, mountainous terrain to the plain Jane jungle island in the first game, so that's part of the reason why the second game is my favorite in the series. So there I was, 2 out of 3 games complete, and somehow only 1 week left until the arrival of Uncharted 4, my self-imposed deadline for completing the trilogy. 1 week quickly turned into 2 days after some spring football practice and physics homework kept me from the PlayStation, but I was determined. So I dove into Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception. When you're playing the games back to back, it's actually pretty refreshing to start the next one. The action slows down and you get a 3 to 4 year jump in graphics capabilities. Somehow, Elena's hair still fails to look like it was made of any substance that humans have ever encountered, but hair is hard, so I have to forgive Naughty Dog on that one. I gave it a few hours on my first day and I was still enjoying myself. But 2.5 games deep, I could feel the burnout on the horizon. Before I knew it, it was the night before release, and I had barely completed half of Uncharted 3. So Josh came over, and we spent the next 10 hours absolutely slogging through the latter half of the game. I don't know if it was just fatigue from beating the entire series in a month, or because the final chapters of this game seemed to take longer and be more contrived than any of the other games. But I left my 1 month Uncharted experience pretty much hating the third game. When we were nearing the end of the game, I just remember waiting for that token monster to show up, the clear sign that we were in the fourth quarter. I had been trained by the first 2 games. But from what I remember, there's not much supernatural that you face in this game. I just have it burned into my memory how much I hated the twist at the end of the game, how long it took to beat. But to be honest, it was like 2 in the morning, and my memory of this game has only gotten foggy over the years. So it's finally time. 5 years later, and I'm ready to dive back in, see what I missed the first time. I haven't replayed the first 2 games, but I consider my memory of them to be pretty good. So here we go. Uncharted 3. Does it still suck? Right off the bat, it's clear that Uncharted 3 wanted to set itself apart with new and more diverse gameplay. The opening scene is a fistfight that serves to introduce slightly more complex hand-to-hand mechanics, and I think these felt pretty clunky. It's really not a melee combat game, and if you miss a triangle to dodge prompt, you just get hit and then you wait for the next one with what feels like a pretty unnatural delay between getting hit and standing up straight. A lot of fights, you're just button mashing and then waiting for a triangle prompt to pop up so you can get a good hit in. But eventually, with some practice, you can make the fight run pretty smooth. I did like that it was a half-decent alternative to the endless gunfights in these games, but there wasn't a ton of chances to take advantage of the hand-to-hand combat system in a satisfying way, and if you do try to punch someone during 90% of the gunfights in this game, you're just gonna get shot. So, what about the shooting? Well, where do I start? It's classic Uncharted gun mechanics once again. It took me quite a few firefights to become accurate again, since the tightest reticle you ever get is a circle, so it's kind of hard to nail headshots, especially at a good distance. Unfortunately, that is the only way you're going to take someone out in a single hit. Even the naked enemies are pretty bullet spongy, and they take as many as like 10 shots to the chest before going down. But that's really a critique of Uncharted in general, because I think all the games had trouble ramping up the difficulty in the second and third acts. So you just end up with either way too many bad guys or way too bullet spongy. It wouldn't be too bad except for the added fact that most of them don't even react to being shot, and they only keel once they've been fully saturated with bullets. As much as I could complain about the fighting simply because it's frustrating, I'd say this game pars the whole for action, and any complaints I have are fairly nitpicky because the action is definitely not the part of this game that I disliked the first time, and I don't think it affected my overall opinion during the second playthrough either. There is another gameplay element that I guess I haven't talked about yet. That's the puzzles. Puzzles are a pretty big staple of the Uncharted games, and this one's no different, but as usual, they don't really have a story impact. The only thing that really caught me off was trying to move through the puzzles too quickly, and that's just something that happens to me anytime I'm replaying a game and there's a slow spot that I don't want to play through again. But I was definitely able to beat all the puzzles in this pretty quickly. Also, since we're talking about mechanics, there are vehicles in this game. Earlier on, you pretend to be a car, you get to push a few jeeps around, and then you ride a horse, which pretty much just drives itself while you shoot, but there is at least some vehicle play in this game. It's nothing like the fourth game, but there's not really much going on here as far as driving vehicles. Lastly, on a positive note, one of the best aspects of this game is the camera. It's very clear that there was tons of work put in merging the cutscenes together with the gameplay and creating cinematic shots that range from a giant zoomed out shot that would establish the scene, or even a really up close and personal shot to show that you're in a tight space. It's definitely not Uncharted 4, but I do want to stay away from comparisons to that game since it wasn't out yet the first time I played this game, and I don't think it's fair to compare any game to Uncharted 4. In most cases, the camera is doing exactly what I would want it to, showing the action from unique angles and creatively panning to reframe the situation. The execution was not always perfect, and there was still some fades to black. I definitely didn't like the many scenes forcing you to run towards the camera and then dodge, jump, and turn without being able to see where you were going. Those were a pretty glaring weak point. But overall, A+ work here. The game was certainly never visually boring. Now, let's talk about the story. Simple enough, Francis Drake was an adventurer a really long time ago. He was sent on a secret mission from Queen Elizabeth. He found something, but he told her that he didn't find anything, and he hid the treasure with a bunch of cryptic clues. So let's start with what I like. The game is the first one where we see young Nathan Drake, and it's pretty great. The story is really focused on the relationship between Drake and Sully. I mean, Elena is only in like 2 chapters total before she gets left behind. So we get to see young Drake meeting Sully for the first time, and stealing from him, of course, but they hit it off and become lifelong friends. At the same time, Sully's working for the evil lady Marlowe, and of course, Nate, being slippery, gets there first, and steals the ring right from under her nose that she was trying to get to find this hidden treasure. So the ring is actually pretty iconic for Nathan Drake. He wore it without much explanation during the first 2 games, and we come to find out that he actually named himself Drake after the famous explorer, after his dad gave him up. But that gets drawn out in the 4th game, so we won't worry about it too much. Warp back to the present, and the first fake death has occurred. Cutter is actually working with Nate and Sully, and he just pretended to shoot them in the alley. So now they all get to travel the world searching for clues about this supposed treasure hidden by Nate's namesake, with Marlowe on their tails the entire time. So that's the bare bones of it. But do the characters get arcs? Does the story have depth? Let's get into it. So I want to give a good amount of time to both the main ideas of the story and the insane set pieces that hold it, but I don't really think it'll make sense if I split them up. So I'm going to take you through the story and discuss each little action set piece that happens along the way. Serious spoilers from here on out, kids. As I said before, this is a story about Nate and Sully. So we start in Colombia where they first met. I don't have much to say about the location as it's pretty generic, but this is where the ring theft occurs, and that's pretty much it. From then on, Nate and Sully are inseparable. Sully no longer works for Marlowe, and somehow it took her 20 years to find them again. We jump back to the present, and we get our first bit of foreshadowing. One of the main themes of the story is how Nate relies too much on Sully and bullheadedly trudges forward, using people for whatever he needs without concern. It's not super deep, but it does kind of feel like this could be Sully's last adventure. We'll get back to themes later, though. Right now, we're going to France. One of the things that this game does so well is the locations. Everywhere we go feels completely unique and super interesting. The chateau is a great example of that. It is an absolute travesty that Talbot and Marlowe decide to burn down everything they come into contact with because this was a pretty sweet place. There aren't a ton of story developments here, and I do have to say, this game is one of the ones where I never really know what the heck they're looking for, or why they need a specific artifact. Maybe my ADD got the best of me when they were trying to explain it, or maybe this game's just not the best. So they find their little amulet piece, and then, literally the next day, Nate and Sully arrive in our second location, some castle museum in Syria. Early in the morning, before tourists arrive, they're greeted by Charlie and Chloe, who I never particularly liked, but it's not really a problem for my enjoyment of the game. They aren't major enough characters to really matter anyway. So after running through some pretty silly clues involving the castle towers aligning with the stars and plenty of firefights, our gang is about to stumble into the secret tomb containing the second half of our amulet when the MacGuffin is officially introduced. If you don't know, a MacGuffin is something that exists just to be a plot device, and it can often be pretty dumb or convoluted. And this one is hallucinogenic drugs. Charlie gets shot with a dart that somehow allows Talbot to control his thoughts for a while or something. Either way, Charlie stays bugged out until the exact moment that the story needs him to not be here, hence a MacGuffin. So our gang descends into the supposedly undiscovered crypt because apparently radar archaeology hasn't been invented in the Nathan Drake universe, and they find the second half of the amulet, which then barely escape since the serum wears off just in time for Charlie to not betray the gang. This clue sends them to Yemen, you guessed it. In Yemen, conveniently, Drake's on-again, off-again wife, Elena, meets up with them and decides that it's time for more foreshadowing. She gives Nate grief for dragging Sully into these things and says that it's not worth it, he should let the treasure go. And honestly, I've seen the end of this game, and I think that's some pretty good advice. This city is pretty generic once again, and it honestly kind of reminds me of Colombia rather than looking distinctly Middle Eastern. But eventually, the gang stumbles upon what they needed to find, and after another tomb raiding, they have all the clues they need to find the final treasure that Francis Drake hid. But unfortunately, it's time for more MacGuffin nonsense, so we can set up some massive set pieces that really have nothing to do with the main story of the game. So after learning the location of the city that they're supposed to find, Nate gets drugged the same way Charlie was earlier. He's then captured by Marlowe, and they try to force him to spill the beans, but of course he's uncooperative. So she hands him off to a random pirate to do the killing, despite having her own army at her disposal. This is the part that really makes no sense, considering her men have been trying to fill Nate with bullets for the last week, but I'm gonna go ahead and forgive this one, because it sets up the pirate shipyard, which is one of the most fun locations in this game. For this next bit, Let's do the story first, since there's a little bit of a theme tie-in, but it ends up being a waste of time, so it doesn't really matter. The pirate guy kept Nate alive because he too wants to find this treasure before Marlowe, I guess, and he tries to play prisoner's dilemma, telling him that Sully is being held nearby. So naturally, Drake blasts absolutely every pirate in a 10-mile radius searching for his friend Sully. Sully isn't here, by the way. Nate destroys like 10 ships and hundreds of men just because this guy told him that they were holding Sully. But like I said, this place has my forgiveness because it is just so much fun climbing around this insane shipyard, waves breaking over it, junk to climb on, pirates to fight. It's just one of the best settings to come to Uncharted ever. Remember I said earlier that this game gets creative with the camera? Well, nowhere is it better shown off than some of the insane angles that we get to watch the action from here. I don't know how Drake finds his way through this insane mess of a set piece, but there are just enough ledges and yellow pipes sticking out to make it work. In the end, it all leads to a giant cruise ship. Nate catches up to it, blowing up an entire pirate fleet along the way. Then he gets to the cruise ship, blasts his way to where Sully is supposedly being held, and he goes ahead and blows up the cruise ship for good measure, after discovering that Sully is in fact not there. I also don't get why the pirates decided to make a fake Sully body. This is just for Nate's benefit, and as far as they know, he should have been left back at the port. So after this gigantic yet epic waste of time out of the way, what happens next? Well, Nate just floats on back to Yemen away from the sinking cruise ship. Unfortunately, we've arrived at the part of the story where I'm going to start tearing into this game, because after Nate washes up, he finds Elena, and somehow, during the time that Nate was drugged, Sully was captured, which we weren't shown at all, and last we knew, he and Elena were safe since Nate had run away from them after getting drugged. So by some unknown force, Sully is kidnapped, and just so happened to give up the location of the hidden city that they've been looking for. What follows is us finally getting to see one of the most heavily advertised and supposedly climactic scenes. Nate and Elena assault an airport just in time to catch a cargo plane headed to resupply Marlowe's army. And Elena gets left in the dust in the final minutes. So I really think if there's anyone that Nate just took advantage of during this story, it's Elena, because he used her to get into Yemen and then just left her behind when all the action was supposed to happen. Cut to the plane where Nate has just climbed in, and somehow in a matter of minutes, he enters the cargo hold, opens the back end, and blows up the plane just by pulling on a parachute. Like seriously, what's wrong with this plane? The only thing that Nate did was let go some of the cargo, and all of a sudden it's on fire and exploding, so something weird is happening. Luckily, Nate catches some cargo on his way floating down and becomes the only survivor of this inexplicable plane wreck over top of the desert. This scene is definitely the turning point, where the game goes from bearable to an absolute slog. Up to this point, there have honestly been an exhausting number of exceedingly ridiculous action sequences, and it's pretty insane that Drake is still alive after the number of bullets that he's dodged in just under a week. Since the setting has so constantly changed, it's been really hard to keep track of the story, and the pacing just feels insane. As usual, we've been given some breathers to solve puzzles or grapple around the rooftops, but they always end up transitioning into gunfights, and this game in particular just feels like such a grind. So at the turning point we just arrived at, Drake is walking away from the plane crash in the middle of the desert, and the devs decided that now was time for one of their trademark breaks from the action. So you spend a literal, in real life 10 minutes and around 3 days for Drake wandering around the desert. It doesn't even matter what you do. I'm pretty sure a rubber band on the controller could play this chapter of the game just the same as I could, and my biggest problem is that nothing is happening in the story. In the right context, Drake stuck wandering around the desert could make for a very powerful allegory, but here it just feels like it's wasting the player's time. No real reason for Drake to get punished for this, because right now he's in his redemption. He's not abusing Sully's time because Sully's kidnapped, so now he's the savior. Eventually, luckily, Nate stumbles upon an abandoned city, which of course is filled with more of Marlowe's army, and just in the nick of time, he's saved by someone completely random who's on a horse for some reason. They team up to take down Marlowe's caravan as it heads towards the secret city that is holding Sully, and this is probably the last great action scene in this game. Like I've said before, I can't really fault the game for the action. It was once again epic and fun to play. But at this point, I was just so tired, and while approaching the conclusion of this game, you are forced through so many firefights with so few breaks or even story developments. Like, this guy who saves Nate on horseback is just a completely random person who lives in the desert, and he's like, hey, these bad guys are bad, so I guess I ought to help the guy who's not the bad guys. Anyway, I think that's enough complaining. Let's just explain the end of the game. So we finally arrive to the Pillars of Aram, which I guess is the name of this ridiculously forgettable city that's at the end of the game. And really, this place is just ridiculous. Like, do they ever wonder, why would these people make 200-foot tall doors that require people to stand on opposite ends of the room to open it? It's just a little silly if you think about it with any logic, but Nate and Sully head into the city and discover that it's an oasis with tons of water hidden in the middle of the desert, because apparently nobody ever looked inside this sandstorm. And Nate dunks his head right in, probably still thirsty from his 3-day escapade walking in the desert. This leads into the worst part of the game. Sully gets shot in the back, a supposed story payoff. So Nate chases down Talbot for revenge, and this part actually does introduce some supernatural creatures. Like I'd been expecting, there's supposed to be some kind of extra challenge at the end of these games, and here it is, in the second to last chapter of the entire game. Honestly, these guys aren't very interesting, they're just teleporting bullet sponges, so it ends up just being more annoying, because at this point, I'm just begging for the game to be over. And of course, we come to find out a few minutes later that all of this was in Nate's head. Sully's not dead, and our story has no payoff. Rather than a treasure, it turns out that Marlowe is actually after the hallucinogen that Nate just sucked up, and I don't understand why they had hallucinogens before they got to the city, but there's some demons trapped in this casket, and apparently it's in the water, and that's what poisons the water, so they want this because it's a very powerful drug. Before I finish my thoughts on the rest of the story, there is one more scene that really just irks me. When escaping the city, Marlowe drops into some quicksand, and Nate, after waiting a bit too long staring at her, makes a half-hearted attempt to save her, which just made me mad, because it doesn't serve to redeem Nate's character, nor does it have any grounds. Like, if Nate was so good-natured, why did he wait so long to try and save her? It just makes no sense. I'm happy to see her die, and I don't think it affects Nate's character at all, whether or not he tried to save her. Oh man, we made it. The game's over, and thank goodness. This game drags so hard in the fourth quarter, it's just insane. So where did we end up thematically? Well, here's the thing, nothing really happened. If you ask me, Nathan Drake is the exact same person at the end of the game that he was at the beginning. We see the repeated theme throughout, that his endless pursuit of treasure at any cost to him or his friends should have consequences. Nate is a bull in a china shop, red-eyed and focused on only what he wants. So it would seem fitting that his character learns something. And what better way to learn something than losing his best friend and father figure to his own pig-headedness? Him chasing down this treasure would be the downfall of this relationship. Well, apparently the better way is for Nate to experience no consequences at all. In the end, all of his actions end up being justified by the inexplicable kidnapping of Sully, while Nate is off with the pirates wasting time. So Nate gets exactly what he wants once again. He discovers a treasure, and he gets to be the hero, saving his best friend. After all the work you put in grinding through the game, there's not much to show for it. Nate's character arc really goes in a circle, and most of the other characters don't even get enough screen time to have an arc. So instead, there are stepping stones for Nate to reach his final goal, or to introduce contrivances without Nate being affected by them too early on. So is it bad? Well, no. The story here is definitively one of the worst. The treasure thereafter is not very interesting. All the storylines just kind of get muddled together and overshadowed by the insane set pieces. And honestly, I think they get more credit for the pirates than the main villains. I thought they were a lot more interesting, and I wouldn't have minded if they were the main antagonists of the game rather than the Red Tie Goons, which must have injected a tracker into Nathan Drake, because they were able to find him anywhere on the globe in less than a day. The action in this game stands out as some of the best in the franchise, but since it serves no real purpose to the game's story, I just end up leaving with a bad taste in my mouth. Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception gets a 6 out of 10, combining its 9 out of 10 action with a 3 out of 10 story. Do better next time, Naughty Dog. Oh yeah, they already did. Well, that is it for this one, guys. I just want to say, if you made it this far, thank you so much for sticking it out. If you do, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. It would really help me out. And if you have a friend who's also obsessed with Uncharted, Naughty Dog, or PS4 exclusives, maybe even share the video with them. I know this one took longer to come out than my usual bi-weekly schedule, but I hope it was worth it. I hope to keep bringing more quality content, and I'm not really sure what's next. I'm probably going to be playing Uncharted 4 again as a palate cleanser though, so we'll see. As always, I have been Jamster, and I'm out. Okay, speaking of plot threads that went nowhere, I just remembered when I was editing, because I saw this clip, this random guy like turned into a zombie, he turned all green, and we have no idea what happened to him. It's never explained in the story, and it's never brought up again. I think he gets bit by one of the spiders or something, but like, what happened? And why did they never touch on this again? Oh, it was just weird, man. This game, oh man. Okay, also if you're still here, I was researching this game and I just realized that they actually split their dev team in half for this game. So half of them were developing Last of Us and half of them were developing this game. And I think that speaks so much because the story in Last of Us gets so much more attention than this one, and it's kind of crazy. So I think they like took their action team and they put them on this game, and they took their story team and they put them on Last of Us. So I don't know what happened, but that's pretty crazy. If you're still, what are you still doing here? Just go read a book, man. I don't know. Go play some video games. I don't know. All right, bye.